following podcast is for informational purposes only. The contents of this podcast do not constitute tax, legal, or investment advice. Take responsibility for your own decisions, consult with the proper professionals, and do your own research.
Hey IQers, this is GRTiQ. Recently, we've been adding transcripts to every release of the podcast, and we're also going back in time and adding transcripts to prior episodes. So if you're a longtime listener of the podcast or just getting started, be sure to visit grtiq.com/podcast for transcripts for today's episode and all the great ones that came before it.
Roger that.
So graphs, as we were mentioning before, they are like the entry point for someone wanting to index or observe something happening on some protocol, some application on chain, right? And they're relatively easy to get started with. So that might be the reason why they've just become like standard, or at least default for every application to use.
We're like astronauts, floating in the space of time. Just to fast and
Welcome to the GRTiQ podcast. Today I'm speaking with Jaime Herrero with Messari. Jaime recently worked on the on-chain data team at Messari, where he played a key role in building and deploying several of the Messari subgraphs active on the graph. Anyone interested in crypto and Web3 is already familiar with Messari, and longtime listeners of the podcast know that I've hosted other members of the Messari team here on the GRTiQ podcast, including Ryan Selkis, founder and CEO. Beyond his work at Messari, Jaime has a unique and fascinating journey into the industry, with involvement in early projects that many crypto OGs will remember. During this interview, we not only talk about those early experiences, and we'll also explore Jaime's work building subgraphs at the graph and discuss the vital role of the graph and subgraphs for Web3. Toward the end of our conversation, Jaime also talks about the recent release of Substreams-powered subgraphs and shares his opinion about the future of Web3 and the graph. As always, we start the discussion talking about Jaime's educational background.
So when I started studying in college, I started doing aerospace engineering because I thought it was like the coolest thing that was there to study. And it was like a challenge, no? Like it was among the hardest things that you could study in engineering, terms. So I went for it and stuff, got started, did 2 years of that. And while I was doing that, I found out that I really like to build software and like to code and stuff. And 2 years in, I just dropped out from aerospace, started studying software to push that passion. But yeah, that lasted for another 2 years until I finally dropped out again. And just that's like a summary of my educational background. After that, no more education.
So if you had stayed with aerospace engineering, did you have at least a vision of what you plan to do with that education?
I'm actually not sure. I don't know. When I look at my friends, the ones that have graduated from it, the ones that stayed, they've taken like so many different paths. One, for sure, like a PhD on like vibrations and something. Some others have ended up in like just regular like finance or consulting or, and just a few have ended up working in the industry in like Airbus or mainly Airbus because it was in Europe, from Spain. I don't know what I would have done. One of the things that I not disliked, but was relatively uncomfortable with is the fact that when you participate in an aerospace engineering project, it's like so huge of a project and you participate on like this tiny piece. Now you might be designing the screw that goes in the wing in like this corner of, it's a project that lasts forever, 10 years in design and building and stuff. And you're only responsible for this tiny thing. So it doesn't feel yours, no? I don't know what I would have ended if I kept pursuing that. But yeah, there was that, like, wanted to be more of an owner of, the thing that you get to build.
Jaime, I've had the opportunity to interview a lot of people on the GRTiQ podcast and a lot of engineers, as you might imagine, a lot of them software engineers, a few mechanical and system engineers. And I want to ask you this question about that engineering brain. how would you explain why so many people that are working in software, working in coding, may come from an engineering background?
I don't know. Like, I think it's very convenient, or like having a brain that works this way, like everything like step, cause, consequence, or like this has a reason. That way of thinking, I think is it just aligns too good with coding, because that's what you have to be very, I don't know, to the point. Like, you're going to take anything for granted. You have to be very explicit on what you instruct the computer to do, right? And it makes sense. It just makes sense. If something doesn't work, it makes sense, no? So being able to think that way, I don't know, I guess it makes it easier, and that making it easier attracts more people to that. I don't know. If you can work doing something that aligns how your brain functions, it's just like a natural fit or something.
Yes. And so I assume it's fair to say that you use a lot of the skills that you learned as an aerospace engineer during your time at university as a coder in the work you're doing now?
More than the skills is the knowing how to think on the edge cases, and like grabbing a problem and studying all the different possibilities and ending up on what's the best solution, or like doing trade-offs, more than actual, I don't know, hard skills. Like in college, we would study like math and physics and more math, and like chemistry and more math. So you don't get to use that much math when you code, at least in like, I don't know, commercial, just regular consumer products. If you were, I don't know, doing some simulation of like physics or something, then probably yes. But that's not the case for most engineers, I would say, software engineers. So summarizing, to a certain extent, on the how to think, how to approach a problem, how to break it down into different pieces and like tackle it, yes. On all the actual like math and like things that they teach you, not so much.
A fairly common question I ask on the podcast is for people like you who have studied in a different field and ended up working in blockchain and Web3. If you look back then on your understanding of aerospace engineering in that industry, do you see ways in which blockchain and Web3 disrupt or somehow improve that industry or that field?
So since I didn't get to work in the industry, I didn't see all the logistics, how things work under the hood, all the fabrication of the different pieces, materials, whatnot. I'm not sure, but there's one thing in aerospace engineering, the aerospace industry in general, which is like super heavily regulated, right? Because of security and like, I don't know, when there's an accident, it's like terrible and so on. So it's super regulated. So every new piece, every new device, every new design that goes into a plane needs to go through like all these 1,000 like review processes. And it is like too long of a process. So if we wanted to disrupt somehow with Web3 something in the industry, I would expect it to be a forever lasting process. Not something that would come one day and then everyone takes and then the whole industry has changed. Yeah, it's like, for example, if you say right now planes are pretty much fly on autopilot, right? The pilot just is there just in case and stuff. But most of the flying the plane is automatic, like devices, like electronics, radars, whatever. So we could technically, maybe in just a couple of years, 5 years, something like that, remove the pilots from the picture and have planes just fly by themselves. But in terms of regulation and like convincing the public of doing that, it's probably not going to happen anytime soon, right? So if we wanted to do any Web3 disruption in the industry similar to that, I would expect like this kind of resistance.
So Jaime, if you can, just take us back in time. And can you share when you first became aware of crypto and what some of your first impressions were?
Yeah, so I was in college, right? And I don't know, when you get to college is when you start maybe thinking more by yourself and trying to go against the things you've been taught or learned when you were small and whatnot. And so I had like this politics new vision or theory that I was like just fighting myself, I guess. And during that process, I came up across a book that was called Bitcoin, the Future of Money. I think that's what it was. And I read it. I was like, oh, this is interesting. And I read it. And I was, oh, like this aligns pretty well with the things I'm thinking today. You know, like if Bitcoin becomes a currency of the world in 10, 50 years, then all these things will happen, no? And this is going to be very cool. And then I thought at the same time, if Bitcoin becomes the currency of the world and today it's worth like $400 or something, when that happens, it's going to be worth a lot more. So I should have many today, But I was in college, I was poor. And so I started to find ways on how could I get more of them. And essentially what I got to was started freelancing. I started learning to code, to be able to do freelance projects, to then be able to just get any money to buy Bitcoin or just get it directly in Bitcoin. There was a freelance website where you could get paid in Bitcoin. And that's how I first learned about it.
The GRTiQ podcast is made possible by a generous grant from the Graph Foundation. The Graph Grants program provides support for protocol infrastructure, tooling, dApps, subgraphs, and community building efforts. Learn more at thegraph.foundation. That's thegraph.foundation.
Hi, this is GRTiQ, and thank you for listening. Listeners who enjoy this content can help support the GRTiQ podcast by leaving a review or a 5-star rating wherever they download podcasts, by sharing episodes on social media, or by simply telling a friend or colleague about something they heard or learned from one of our guests. It's support from listeners like you that make it possible for us to keep shining a light on the people and stories behind Web3 and the graph.
Roger that.
It's common on the podcast for people to become interested in crypto because of an ideology that they have. And obviously ideologies evolve over time, but something at that moment in time sparked their interest. And you said there were some things that you were thinking about. Can you just give us a sense of how you were thinking about the world at that time and why it was then that Bitcoin was attractive to you?
Yeah. So at that time, I was very extreme on my views. I feel like as you grow older, you might become more tempered. But my view at the moment was taxes are theft, right? And if we are able to if we find this way of working with money that you can move around super fast and pay and just move around the countries without any friction pretty much. And the whole economy starts using that money that is hard to track or is hard to seize or is hard to, I don't know, you cannot go, the government cannot go after the whole population because they are using something that is not convenient to them. And if that happens and they the government starts losing track of the taxes that they need to charge to people because it just, not because people are ill-intended, but because it's more convenient to just, I don't know, you just go with your life, you pay, you get money, blah, 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 blah. And then that's not tracked anywhere. That doesn't have any registry anywhere. So it's hard for people themselves to just go and pay their taxes. Eventually, the governments will run out of cash because they cannot charge any taxes or way less than they could before. And then they'll start collapsing. And then you get to anarcho-capitalism kind of world. That was my expectation or my idea.
So since that time, as you said, you've gotten older, your ideas have somewhat matured on these topics and other things as well, I'm sure. But as you think back to the way you were thinking about Bitcoin at that time versus how you think about it now, what's changed? And I'm sure there's even greater depth to the way you think about the impact of Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think it's not going to be that easy for that to happen. It could happen eventually, but I think it's easier for governments to crack down on the usage of Bitcoin and crypto in general. So it's not going to be just like that. People start using it and then they just collapse.
So you mentioned that you started earning Bitcoin by doing some freelance coding work. You were a student at the time studying aerospace engineering. Was that a hard leap to make, jumping right into learning coding and trying to earn some Bitcoin?
I don't think so, because it was fun. I really liked it. It wasn't a chore. It wasn't like studying. It was just cool. It was fun. Plus, I had done, the first year of college, we had some programming course, which I enjoyed, and I did well at it. So it just, I don't know, it just fit naturally.
If you think back to that time in the industry, and it was early on and you were getting involved, to now, and let's just assume you're Jamie in the present trying to get in, things have changed. Is it easier now for someone to kind of pick up that freelance work or to learn the coding, or have things not changed as much as I might assume?
They've changed, definitely, 100%. Right now, there's a million more things that weren't back then. So if you wanted to get involved with crypto or Bitcoin, you would just go to Reddit or some community, some Discord. There were just like, I don't know, 40 people. You were able to be up to date with all the different like messages in like different communities. It wasn't too crazy. And in the terms of things to learn, Ethereum wasn't a thing yet. It had just gotten launched and stuff. So there was no EVM, no dApps, no Solidity, no nothing. It was just, you have Bitcoin and a lot of forks or like, different coins that work similarly that you could integrate with your websites to send them around, or I don't know, have this store that you can get paid in Bitcoin. So it was pretty simple at that point. Today, I don't even know the different amount of like EVMs and like all different chains, all different networks. And I work at Messari, but there's like so much to be on top of that I think it's harder because you just don't know where to start.
When you think about the saturation of the market, which is essentially what you're describing there, how do you make sense of it? I mean, I have interviewed TM Lee, one of the co-founders at CoinGecko, and he was mentioning when they launched CoinGecko, there was only 1,000 tokens or something like this, and now there's 10,000 and beyond. And you're expressing a similar sentiment here. How do you make sense of that? What does that signal or mean?
In a way, maturity of the industry, in a way. Like back then, there was no one working on things, just a few, like a couple nerds, I guess. Today, this is big. Like there's something here, right? There's a lot of people building different things, different approaches to things. So we might not have found yet the way to give value to the real world, quoted, in a way that is able to onboard the whole population. But what I'm trying to say is there's something here that we're finding, that we're working with, that makes sense to the world at some point. And more people are seeing it because there's just lots of things going on all the time. So I don't know, I think it's healthy. I think it's good.
Basically, what you're saying is this is an industry finding its identity and doing so through kind of a lot of expansion and different opportunities and innovation.
Yeah, totally. You could say that. Yeah.
So after you became interested in crypto, this is 2016, you start doing some freelance work, earning some Bitcoin. What happens next?
So I'm doing that, right? I'm doing my freelance projects. And there was this guy, my first client, when I started doing freelancing, that I made a project for him for like $50, and it was like a whole website with his admin panel and this whole giant thing. And then he comes to me and he says, "Hey, have you heard about this currency? Rayblocks, what's it called?" And I was like, no, I haven't. I'll look into it. I don't know. And then that's where the interaction ended. And a month later, he comes back again and he says, "Hey, do you have a chance to look into Rayblocks?" And I was like, "No, I haven't. I'm sorry, I've been busy with all these like freelance projects, right?" And he says, "Because I've made 1 Bitcoin or something like that, 1 Bitcoin since we last talked like last month." And I was like, "Wait, what's going on here on this Rayblocks thingy that he made 1 Bitcoin he didn't code or anything? How did he make 1 Bitcoin in a month while I'm here like doing my projects and like I'm not going at that pace, right? What's going on there?" And so I started looking into that currency, that community and stuff. And essentially it was just like a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, you could say, but the consensus algorithm was different. It didn't work with like mining or like big blocks like once every 10 minutes. It was everything like asynchronous. Every account was able to transact at any point in time, and it would get processed instantly in a kind of delegated proof of stake. It was something like that. And the thing was that transactions were instant. They were feeless. And the network was supposed to be able to handle up to like 7,000 transactions per second. When at the time there was like this debate in Bitcoin, like, oh, we can only do 3 transactions per second, and we're onboarding more people and like transaction fees and so on, so on. So it was like, this is like Bitcoin, but better.
Jamie, a lot of what you're hitting on here is historical in nature. Rayblocks goes back a little bit. And of course, I think you're describing the block wars. I wasn't around for this, and I'm imagining a lot of my listeners weren't either. But can you take us kind of historically back to what the main issues were at this time and what was decided during the quote unquote block wars?
Yeah, that was fun. So Bitcoin started hitting the limit on the block size, right? The blocks would start getting full with transactions, and fees would start racing and start getting more expensive. And people started saying, oh, if Bitcoin can only handle this number of transactions per second, it's never going to replace Visa, or it's never going to be the currency of the world. It's never going to, if it can only do this little amount of transactions per second. So we have to increase it somehow. And there were two main sides in the community. The big blockers, you could say, and the small blockers. The big blockers said, Bitcoin at the time, the block size was 1 megabyte. I think that's what it is today too, right? I'm not sure. But it was 1 megabyte. So it fits like a certain amount of transactions. And the most obvious solution was, okay, let's increase the block size. Let's make it 2 megabytes so that it can fit twice as many transactions. And the argument was, it's easy to do. Satoshi put the 1 megabyte block size back in the day as some kind of like spam measure to, like, it wasn't intended to be something for forever. It was like a patch to resolve some other issue that they had even like way in the past. So it was like, super easy, let's just remove that max 1 megabyte and that's it. And then at the other side of the community, you had like the small blockers. They would say, I mean, we could do this, but there's two problems. One, it's a hard fork. If part of the nodes upgrade to the no limit and part of the nodes don't, depending on how big that difference of like nodes is, you're going to have a network split. And that's going to be, at this point in history for Bitcoin, it's going to be terrible, right? Like, which one is the real Bitcoin? Plus, the other issue is we start increasing the block size arbitrarily. We might put out of the network smaller nodes or smaller miners, or that, I don't know, they might be restricted by their network speeds or their hardware or whatever. If we start increasing the block size, they might not be able to deal with that, and it's going to get more centralized. And we don't want centralization, and so on, so on, so on. So there was this division in the community.
So what came of all of that?
So you had like the community super divided. Some different like developer groups, developer teams started doing their different approaches to things. There was one of the big blockers was Bitcoin Unlimited, that they said, let's just make the market decide the size of the block, right? Nodes just have like this different software that coordinates and like they decide the block size based on market conditions. The free market will be the one able to find the optimum, right? That was the theory. And then you would have different people, like the different community running the different nodes with the different software that they supported. And you could see like all these stats, like, 2% of the network is running this, 1% of the network is running this, 80% of the network is running this. The small blockers, they were in favor of not only not increasing the block, but instead working around the issue with segregated witness, which was one of the agrees that was made at that point, which I'm not sure about how it technically works. I might just say something I'd be totally wrong, but it was a way of, with a soft fork, without having like the network split into two, increase the block size without actually doing it. Like it was, you can remove the signature part of the transaction and put it somewhere else in a way. I don't know. Someone who knows and is listening to me is going to say, this guy doesn't know shit. But there was something around it, okay? Like the block size increased in a way that if you run that node in the network, it would just work without any disruption to older software nodes, like older versions of the nodes. So big blockers increase block size, small blockers, let's do SegWit, segregated witness, that increases the block size in a different way, without a hard fork. And then someone said, we cannot decide, let's do both. Let's just increase the block size and apply segregated witness at the same time. And like miners reunited with like some like Bitcoin developers. There was this whole group, and they agreed, okay, let's do this. And they started signaling like all the blocks that were mined. They had like this signaling from the miner, like saying, I support. It had a name, like, I don't know. There was a short name for both the SegWit and the big block increase. But yeah, I signal in favor of this thing. And the idea was, as soon as we get to this threshold of miners supporting this, we'll just do it. But then the small blockers were like, no, like miners cannot, like they cannot just collude and decide something for the whole community. Like miners are not the only people involving in this thing. There's also the whole people just running nodes, or like just users, light nodes, full nodes, blah, 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 that they might not be mining and might be affected by this. And so I don't remember the details, but someone pushed what they called user-activated soft fork, which was essentially having the community of nodes, but not miners, run this version that supported this other software upgrade. And at some, whenever one threshold was met, it would just be upgraded. So eventually the small blockers won. segregated witness was implemented without an increase to the block size. But when that happened, at the same time, big blockers forked away, like Bitcoin Cash was created.
Well, I appreciate that history on the block wars. And as you mentioned, while this is all going on, you became interested in Rayblocks and started to do some work and contribute in that community. Take us back to how you got involved in working in that community.
So I knew about them because of this client of mine, right? Like he got involved with them earlier, and then he essentially, I was surprised, like how has he made so much money in this amount of time while I was here working my freelance stuff and haven't made half of that, no? As I got interested, started getting more involved in the community, had a talk about, I don't know, how the things work with the founder on like Slack. It was super tiny. It was like very familiar, everything. And they had a lot of things that needed to be done for the community to grow, for the software to function properly, for, just everything to be more mature. So initially I started taking on these bounties. I don't know, some how to calculate the proof of work that is needed to attach to a transaction because of spam, something. No, I started taking on these small tasks to contribute to the community, get a better understanding of how everything worked. And it was just fun. And maybe I can, I don't know, somehow make as much money as this guy has made in like this short amount of time. So I started doing that. And at some point, Nano didn't have a wallet, like a good one that was user-friendly and stuff. Like if you wanted to hold Nano, your only option at the time was, you had two options. Running the network node, having it sync to the head of the chain and so on, and then use that as your wallet. But it was very buggy and it was heavy to run. You had to download the whole history and you have to kept it connected to be on sync. Or the other option was a Telegram bot. There was a guy that he made a Telegram bot, but it was custodial. Like he was running his node, and with this bot, you were able to have your own wallet and stuff. So those were the two options. One was inconvenient and the other one was custodial, centralized, and like by just this one guy, right? So I said, it would be cool to have a user-friendly, convenient to use, and that works, simple wallet. And it would be also a cool challenge for me to build it. It would be fun. So I decided to do it. And at the time, the wallet that I would use mainly for my day-to-day things on Bitcoin was the one that was blockchain.com now. Back in the day, it was blockchain.info. And they had a wallet. It ran on the client side, and like when you logged out, your wallet would be encrypted and stored in the server. So you were able to access your wallet from anywhere, and in a way it was safe. Like they weren't holding your funds or your keys. So I took the same approach. I started building this wallet based on using blockchain.info wallet as my inspiration.
Jaime, you mentioned there Nano, and of course, Rayblocks rebranded to Nano, and what you eventually made was the Nano wallet. What was it like going from a college student studying aerospace engineering to getting interested in crypto to building an actual wallet for an actual community? That's an incredible story.
Yeah, it was pretty fun. I had a little fun. And I remember those days with, I don't know, it was just like nice memories. But at the same time, looking back into that, like things could have gone very wrong. When I started the wallet, for example, it started growing like crazy. It was the most convenient to use, right? And since Nano started skyrocketing like crazy too at that time, other people that were joining the space, they were just signing up in my wallet. And it was non-custodial. I wasn't holding the funds, but things could have gone wrong. Like someone could have just, I don't know, hacked something and put a malicious front end that would steal your keys, or like things could have happened. No, I had been coding for like 2-3 years, didn't have any experience at all. Like were probably very insecure and safe. So things could have happened. And at the peak, like I remember we would do our SQL queries to see our users. We didn't have any fancy tooling, like any user tracking, or no, we would just go to how many users have been created in like these 24 hours, right? So at the peak, I remember having like 300,000 unique users and around 20 million Nano, which each Nano was worth at the peak like $35. So like $600 million stored in the wallet, in keys managed by the wallet, not in the wallet. But still, like if something had gone wrong, it could have been very wrong, right? So I'm lucky that nothing really big happened. At some point we had a hack. They hijacked our DNS or something. I don't remember what happened. but it only affected like 8 users, and we were able to like cover their losses. So that's how it ended. I think we have a Medium post explaining what happened and stuff. But yeah, it could have been way worse than that, right? So I have good memories of those times, but thinking now about how things could have been, they could have been just too bad.
I really got to double click on this because this story, the more I hear it, Jamie, just blows my mind. So now you're an entrepreneur in the space and you've got this wallet with millions and millions of dollars and a ton of use. So now you're an entrepreneur. What was that experience like of learning entrepreneurship at a young age and having great success?
It happened by accident, right? Like I created this wallet because it was a cool thing to build. And then it just happened to grow like crazy. And then I was like tied to it, right? You kind of just live with what's going on. Not that I wanted to, but it happened by accident. And I didn't know what to expect. I didn't have a goal in mind other than this is cool. But now, like looking back, had I known a little bit more about just starting a product, a company, building a product, finance in general, managing users, design. Like if I had known back then what I know now, I don't know, maybe I would have focused a little bit more on, okay, we have all these users. How can we monetize, right? Because all during the 2-3 years that I was running the wallet, we were just paying the costs as a donation to the community, essentially, right? It was fun, but I don't know, it was charity in a way. So I don't know, I would have liked to know more about how I could have monetized that because it was a big amount of users and a lot of like money being like placed there. So maybe, I don't know, it's hard to also monetize a wallet that is non-custodial. That's part of the problem, but I should have thought more about it.
Well, you and I are speaking today because you're part of the Messari team. And of course, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about Messari and the graph. But before we get there, how does that story end? Not only the Rayblocks story, but the Nano wallet that you built. How does that story end?
So in 2018, early 2018, bear market hits, everything just floors. Bitcoin goes from 20K to like 3K, Nano from 35 to half $1. And I'm like, okay, time to look for a job in the real world. So I started working in like this other startup, like it was fintech, but it was just like real world, non-crypto related at all. And then around a year ago, I was looking to change in my career and I was in the States. I logged into my Binance account, wanted to do some like exchange. Like I think I wanted to offload part of my Nano. I don't know what was I trying to do. But then I got this alert, right? Like Binance doesn't work in the US. If you want to trade, sign up in Binance US. And so I was like, okay, I'm too lazy. I'm going to try all these DeFi stuff that I've been hearing all around that I don't know what it is. So I withdrew some of my coins to, it was Binance Smart Chain, pardon me. But yeah, I withdrew it there. I started playing with like other different DEXs and like lending protocols. And I discovered all these leverage yield farming. And I was like, oh, like how many things have happened in these 3 years that I've been in the real world, right? Like, when I left, everything was like dead and it was just Bitcoin. Ethereum was starting, but no one, like, it was all the DAO hack, all those things. But I didn't understand what was going on there. 3 years later, there's this whole world built. So I'm like, I need to get back into the industry because I don't want 3 years from now, look back again and say, oh, what has happened here again? And so trying to get back into the industry, and here in Messari, I ended.
Well, Jamie, as I said, your story is incredible. And this additional piece of riding that ride with Nano Wallet, having a bear market onset, and then leaving for 3 years and going to work in the quote unquote real world is just another incredible chapter to extract from where you are today. I guess what I want to ask you before we talk about your work at Messari is, why did you come back? I got to think that was a whirlwind of experiences. You launched this wallet, you have a tremendous amount of success, you see an incredible market, you see a bear market and everything tanks and you have to go back and find work. So where does this conviction come from where someone like yourself's like, yeah, I'm going to go back in and get involved in this again?
I have a problem, which is I'm extremely problematically too much optimistic. So everything tanked, everything died but I was still like, this will rebound. It might not be this year, might not be next year, it might not be in 10 years, but Bitcoin is something, is going to go back, no? And Nano too, because Nano is better than Bitcoin. And all the rest of bags that I have, they're just going to come up. So I left, but I was still involved. I still had my crypto, I still had my accounts. I didn't trade or anything because the times I've done it, it just doesn't work. I'm not very good at that. But I still had my connection to the industry. And when I left my previous company, it was just, I don't know, I had never left in a way. So it was a perfect moment to just come back. I wasn't hurt from what happened, like the market tanking, everything dying and everything. It wasn't something that made me reject the space or be unhappy with it. Because I'm so badly optimist that this is going to come back. Like it's just a matter of time.
So stepping out of the industry and then stepping back into it a year ago, did things change dramatically? Did it feel like everything had matured during that time that you were away?
Yes, there's 1,000 things, like a million things that weren't back then, as we were mentioning before, right? And are here now. Especially when I started playing with DeFi, I don't know. It was like this whole world opened in front of me, like all these things that you can do. I want to understand how Solidity works, how the EVM works, how I want to eventually just build something again, but like on this new paradigm. I don't know. And I remember when I learned, when I started learning about how these things work, and I learned about flash loans, it was like, this is pretty cool. A loan that you can get as big as you want, as long as there's liquidity, just for like an instant, and you can do with it whatever. Like that's something that doesn't happen in the rest of the world, right? In traditional finance. Technically makes a lot of sense. Is if you don't return the loan, the transaction reverts and nothing happened. Like it never happened. You never took the loan. I don't know. It was like, this is so cool. This is so cool. So yeah, the industry is way more mature than 4 years ago.
Hey, this is Jaime Herrero with Messari. If my conversation with the GRTiQ podcast has been helpful to you, then consider supporting future episodes by becoming a subscriber. Visit grtiq.com/podcast for more information. That's grtiq.com/podcast.
GRTiQ
Podcast.
Thanks for listening.
Roger that.
As I mentioned earlier, Jamie, we're talking today because when you did come back to go full-time in the industry, you found yourself at Messari, a very well-known and recognized brand within the industry. And longtime listeners of the podcast will know that I've had other members of the Messari team on the GRTiQ podcast, including the founder and CEO, Ryan Selkis, but also my friends, Vincent Wen and Mihai Grigore. And I encourage listeners, if they want to learn more about Messari, to go and tune into those episodes. So, Jamie, let's talk about what you're working on at Messari.
So yeah, at Messari, we do a lot of things. I feel like we have a bunch of different things going on at the same time that I even almost like lose track of what we're working on. But in my particular case, up until like last week, now I'm changing teams, was working on the on-chain data team that focuses mainly on all the blockchain data extraction from the different DeFi protocols, like lending, DEXs, all the activity, all the volumes, everything that's going on there. We try to map to then, we using subgraphs to then like just provide to the community as like open source subgraphs with a standard schema that maps similarly among like different, like similar kind of protocols and so on. And also for use internally for the rest of our products.
If we put the experience you've had working on the on-chain data team at Messari in context of your career, first getting interested in Bitcoin, then going and creating the Nano wallet, stepping out, getting pulled back in because of DeFi and some things you're seeing. And now you're on this Messari team and you're seeing all this data, which is really kind of behind the scenes driving a lot of that stuff. What did it tell you or show you about the industry or things that you thought you already knew?
So when I joined back into the space, what attracted me to come back was all these. I just wanted to learn about all this EVM, all these DEXs, all these lending protocols, like how things actually work under the hood, flash loans, all those things. And by working at Messari, and in particular in this one team, the on-chain data team, my work in the end was going to like see a protocol, read the code, see how it works, and then build a graph that is going to map all the data that is being generated by its activity. So I'm not sure if I can say one particular learning or something that I've discovered, but I have definitely learned about like how things actually work under the hood, which is it's what attracted me in the first place to come back to the space, and it's just pretty cool. It's just pretty cool.
Let's talk about the work you were doing on the on-chain data team as it relates to subgraphs. And again, longtime listeners of the podcast know that this topic of subgraphs have come up a lot of times on the podcast, and I'm non-technical, so it's always opportunities for me to explore and try to understand. How important, from your perspective, are subgraphs for people that want to access or analyze blockchain data?
If you get to like a blockchain, right, and you want to start understanding or looking at what's going on, what's happening with a given particular protocol. You just borrowed money on like this lending protocol, and you say, how does this work? And are these metrics that they're showing legitimate, or how is this calculated? How can I get to calculate this by myself? How would I do that, right? Because if you run like a node, an Ethereum node, you're just going to have like your RPC endpoints and stuff, but nothing tells you there was this borrow created, this money was borrowed at this time for this amount and for this USD value. Like that's not transparent, right? The AVM in the end is just state changes. Like, okay, this value is this value. And under the hood, behind the scenes, it's interpreted by us humans, like this token was transferred, this was a borrow, this was a loan, this is a liquidation. So with subgraphs, it's like the way you can get to understand and to start measuring all those things in a more like human readable way. Like if you want to start tracking all the activity from a given contract, from a given application, subgraphs are just like the most direct approach that you can take to just get started with that real quick.
I often hear developers and others in the Web3 community say that subgraphs have become the default for accessing blockchain data. What's your opinion on that? Is it too early in the industry to declare a default, or do you feel like subgraphs have taken that position?
I think you could say so, yes. Because I remember when I started getting involved in DeFi, you would get to your favorite dApp or like some gambling stuff, whatever you wanted to do. And then you would see a warning like, oh, graph node, something, it's behind. So data might not be up to date. And you would see it in many places. So this is anecdotal, but to me, it looks like everyone is using them as the default for showing metrics on their website from like a given dApp. In fact, there was this summer, with some friends, we tried to just build a smart contract and stuff, and we did this tiny website to interact with it. And there were some metrics that we wanted to show. And the way we did it was create a lot of read methods on the contract and have the wallet call them to like refresh the website. But it felt like super inefficient, super hacky. It worked, but it was ugly. And it's like, so graphs just fit in there nicely. So it's like, I feel that's what everyone is using for that purpose.
And I've asked this question before on the podcast, but really want to hear your opinion and perspective on it. And it's this idea of standardization. So most of my listeners know that Messari joined the graph ecosystem, not only as a user, but also as a core subgraph developer with this objective of creating some standardization of the construction and the way that people build and deploy subgraphs. Why is that an important initiative? Why is standardization something that needs to happen?
Well, because it just makes things easier, right? Like, this saying that says, oh, there's 23 different ways of doing this thing. We should just do one, like single one. Let's do everyone, like do the same. Okay, now there's 24 different ways of doing the same thing, no? So if we start early, right, so graphs are essentially new, right? Like this is what the industry is mainly using from a point of view at this point. And it's like the go-to way of indexing data from smart contracts and protocols. So if we can get it right since the beginning, make it a standard right away, I feel like the industry is going to be in way less pain in the future, right? So just because of that, it's already important.
Well, as you mentioned, and as many people know, the standardization efforts of subgraphs by the Messari team have been very successful, and there's a lot of Messari subgraphs out and available for anybody in the community to come and use. And I think that's an important point. These Messari subgraphs exist, but they are subgraphs designed to pull data from different data sources. So it's basically open source. Anybody can come along and use that subgraph, but it was built by the Messari team under this new standardization. So for listeners that decide to go use or go view the available subgraphs, if they see one that was built by the Messari team, what do you want them to think? Like, what should they know about Messari-built subgraphs?
That's a good question. So I would say there's a few things, depending on what you want to get from that subgraph. If you're just trying to query it, that same data from that same subgraph is what we're using ourselves. So it's in our best interest to just have it right. So we build the subgraphs, and then we have like this whole process of like queuing it and making sure that the data is accurate, comparing it with other sources. So like essentially we want to make sure that the data that comes out from it is accurate both for the community and for ourselves, right? And after having built among the team in like the last 1.5 years, I don't know, maybe 90 different subgraphs deployed in like around, in like 200 different deployments, something like that. There's a lot that we've learned, right, on how to price things. Like pricing is a big problem. How do you get the price of some swap in USD terms when it's like this, I don't know, shit token that no one knows about, and so on, right? We've dealt with that problem for this whole time. So I like to say that our data is solid. And if it's not, we're just on top of it to make sure that we just fix it, because it will be wrong for like ourselves. So we want it to be right.
Before we leave this topic of subgraphs and I ask you some final questions, I do want to ask you about the recent announcement related to Substreams-powered subgraphs. And as somebody with a lot of experience working on subgraphs, can you just share with us briefly your vision for the impact or the kind of impact that something like Substreams-powered subgraphs will have for the ecosystem for Web3?
Yes. So graphs, as we were mentioning before, they are like the entry point for someone wanting to index or observe something happening on some protocol, some application on chain, right? And they're relatively easy to get started with. So that might be the reason why they've just become like standard, or at least default for every application to use. But as you start building, at Messari, we've built many of them, right? And they get more and more ambitious. We want to track more and more data, more and more details, or protocols with this activity, or all of these details, and all these many things. At some point, if the protocol is too active, like you could say Uniswap V2 that has had lots of swaps, right? And just you make us a graph to start indexing it, it just takes too long. It's what we were mentioning earlier, that you would get to this website and you would see a warning saying, oh, graph node is behind so many blocks. So this is what happens. You develop your subgraph, you deploy it, and then until you can use it with today's data, it might take a short amount of time or a longer amount of time, depending on what you're doing and the protocol you're working with. And one of the problems we've hit is certain protocols take too long. So you could say like 3 months, 4 months. And if you have to do any change to it, you have to just start over. Substreams aims to resolve that. So if you can just shorten that cycle, you can index a high activity protocol super fast in like, say, a few hours, or even if it's 1 day, it's already pretty fast compared to subgraphs. And if you combine it with subgraphs themselves and how they become the go-to for the industry, then you have like a winner product, right? Like it could be easy to onboard, it could be fast to index something, and you have like all the network effect from the graph itself and the decentralization from the decentralized network. I know there's potential there. There's something there.
Jaime, thank you for that overview. And I also share similar optimism about the future of Substreams and Substreams-powered subgraphs. And so I have just one final question for you before I ask you the GRTiQ 10. As I've said throughout the interview, your story's been really interesting to me because of the ups and downs and the early nature of it. You got involved in the industry quite early, had the opportunity to have an impact, left for a while, and now you're back at the incredible team at Messari. And my question is this: if you could go back in time, knowing what you know now, and give yourself advice when you first became interested or aware of Bitcoin, what would be the advice you gave to yourself?
I would give two. One, which is like the ugly one, and one, which is the more like nicer one. The nicer one would have been don't leave when the bear market came, like stay, because of all the things that happened. You could have been there involved in everything that was built during those 3 years that I was away. And that would have been pretty cool. That's the nicer one. The uglier one, which is something that, I don't know, I think everyone in this industry has dealt with at some point, is sell at some point, don't hold forever. I remember like late 2017, it was when the bear market was starting to, like the bull market started to like cool down. Nano started going down a little bit. I remember my uncle, he told me, this is going very well and stuff. It can keep going up or it might not, but do something like sell like a 20% or something. Be comfortable with your situation, help maybe your family, just do that. No, you won't regret it. And I was like, okay, I'll do it, but only when it goes back to this price point. And it never did. And so I never sold at 20% and like it just disappeared, right? So yeah, like I would have told myself when your uncle like told you that, just sell at that point. That would be my two advices. Stay and like don't hold onto your bag forever.
So Jaime, now we've reached a point in the podcast where I'm going to ask you the GRTiQ 10. And listeners know this is a standard segment where I ask guests the same 10 questions with the intent of introducing listeners to new information or having them try something different or potentially achieve more in their own life. So, Jaime, are you ready for the GRTiQ 10?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
The GRTiQ 10.
This is the way.
10 questions for astronauts floating in space.
Roger that. This is the way.
What book or article has had the most impact on your life?
I have an answer for all the rest because I'm not too much of a reader, so I don't know.
Yeah, we'll come back to it. So how about this one? Is there a movie or a TV show that you think everybody should watch?
Yeah, there is one I found interesting when I watched it. I remember I watched it when I was a child. It's GRTiQ, the movie, GRTiQ. It has like a, I don't know, kind of a lesson there. For the ones of you that haven't seen it, it's about like this guy that like is born and he wants his dream is to go to space and like do this space exploration and so on. So and at the time like there's high tech and he's born like naturally, and then his brother is born at the time like a few years later when genetic like engineering and stuff is like a common thing. So when you go have your child, you just go and like have it a la carte kind of thing. And then there's the story where at some point in history, society is divided between the natural ones, which are like inferior or less powerful, smaller stamina. They're just not as optimized as the genetically engineered ones. No. And you have that division in society, and the protagonist is on the quote unquote inferior side, right? So it's an interesting movie to watch.
What's the best advice someone's ever given to you?
I would say don't do anything you don't want to do. I'll give more context to this. Like I had like a very hard decision to make like last year. I remember when you're super divided, you start asking advice to everyone. And some might lean towards one side, one decision, someone might lean towards the other side of the decision. And you just get like so confused. But there was this one person that said this to me, like, don't do anything you don't want to do. And like looking back, it just made so much sense. It was, I don't know, it's cheesy, but that would be mine.
What's one thing you've learned in your life that you don't think most other people have learned or know quite yet? That
pretty much every decision that you make is reversible, like 99% of them. So we're scared of many things, but you can undo almost anything you do. And when that clicks, you just, I don't know, go crazy. You just do more random things that are more fun to do or more risky or something, because there's nothing you cannot undo afterwards. And it sounds obvious and probably everyone has heard about it, but it needs to click. So I don't know if this will make someone's click. But yeah, everything is reversible.
What's the best life hack you've discovered for yourself?
Not too fancy, but but I'm very easily distracted with everything. So like when I work, that's bad. You better not be distracted when you're at work. If you just put everything away, like, I don't know, mainly the phone, like put your phone, I don't know, turn it off and like put it in like the other corner of the house or somewhere that you have to actually make an effort to go check it. Mainly the phone, but like everything else, the phone, like any fidget thingies that you might have, papers, pictures, just leave a clear desk. Like when I do that, the days I do that, I function. The days I don't. So yeah, simple but effective.
Based on your own life observations and experiences, what's the one habit or characteristic that you think best explains why or how people find success in life?
I would say two. There's two. One is being like driven, being a go-getter, someone who just gets things done. That's like mandatory. And the second one is talent. I'm not so sure about hard work alone being a thing that will guarantee success or that will give you success. I think you need the two, like being a go-getter, being like driven, being just doing things, but also having talent, which is not something that you can just, okay, now I have talent. No.
And then, Jaime, the final three questions are complete the sentence type questions. The first one is, the thing that most excites me about Web3 is
being like at the frontier of this new either technology or finance paradigm, or just being part of something that is being built right now and that tomorrow might be something common that everyone has or might not. But if it is, and you've been there since the beginning, it's just exciting.
And how about this one? If you're on Twitter, then you should be following.
I liked Napal. I don't know how to pronounce it. The guy from like Angel List. I like that guy.
And how about this one? I'm happiest when?
I pursue my most random ideas. Related to the thing that I said earlier about things being reversible or not, you might think of something that is crazy. And when I do it, it's just fun.
The GRTiQ 10.
After this, I show you
Podcast.
Jaime, thank you so much for your time. It's been incredible to learn more about you and your story, to learn more about the Messari team and the work you're doing. If listeners want to stay in touch with you, follow some of the work that you're doing, what's the best way for them to stay in touch?
So we mentioned Twitter earlier that I don't use it much, but I'm there. So if someone wants to reach me, that's probably the best place. My handle will be in the show notes.
This has been a production of the GRTiQ podcast. For more information, including detailed show notes, visit grtiq.com/podcast. That's grtiq.com/podcast.
Please consider contributing to this project and helping build the community by subscribing and leaving a review. GRTiQ Podcast. Roger that.